Hey everyone, professional photographer Ian Plant here. I am the host of The Photo Critique, and in each episode I offer thoughtful critiques of viewer-submitted photos. And for this episode, I challenged everyone to get creative with shapes, and I can't wait to see what you come up with. Remember, if you like this video, then give it a thumbs up, subscribe to Shuttermonkeys here on YouTube, and ring that bell so you always know when we drop our next helpful video. Hey guys, and welcome to The Photo Critique. Before we get started, I just want to give a quick shout out to Hunt's Photo and Video for helping make these critique sessions possible. Hunt's makes personal service part of every purchase, and their friendly, knowledgeable staff can assist you in selecting the perfect gear. Every episode, I will choose my favorite photo from the ones that were submitted, and Hunt's will give that photographer a $50 gift card. I also want to apologize because right now I'm recording in my garage. I've got renovation going on in my basement where my studio is located, so I've had to move everything temporarily up into this loud, echoey, kind of cold space. And so I'm hoping I can remove a lot of that echo when I process this video, but if I can't remove it all, I do apologize. And this is only temporary. Hopefully the renovations in my basement will be done soon. I'll be moving my home studio back down there, and we'll get away from this noisy garage. All right, for this episode, I asked everyone to get creative with shapes. And this, I think, can be a bit of a challenge for people because I think what happens when you challenge them to get creative with shapes, they go out and they look for things with interesting shapes, and then they just take a picture of that thing. And I think that's a good first step, but that's not really going to allow you to make really creative, original, shape-based images. Shapes are the building blocks of composition, something that I discuss in great detail in my Ultimate Photography Composition course. And if you really want to learn more about creating artistic photographs, you definitely have got to get that course. It is the best course on the topic of photographic composition, bar none. And in that course, I talked a lot about using shapes creatively. So it's not just finding something with an interesting shape and taking a picture of it. It's using the shapes created by objects to create an overall visual design. So usually that shape is just part of the overall visual design. And what you're really trying to do is to relate shapes with other interesting shapes within the composition, so all the shapes work together to create a visual design that gets noticed, which is ultimately your goal with every single photograph, to create something that's going to grab the viewer's attention and not let go. So this was a bit challenging for a lot of people. There were a lot of photos that were just focused on like a single interesting shape, but there were some photos that really stood out where the photographers were getting a bit more creative, and I'm going to focus on those today. So without further ado, let's dive right into the photo critique. This first photo is by Buddy Scott, and he says this was taken on the Potomac River. The Potomac River is my old stomping grounds when I lived in the Washington, D.C. area. I actually lived on the Potomac River for several years. It's a cool place to make photographs. There's lots of interesting landscapes and some really nice wildlife as well. More bald eagles than you can shake a stick at. Though I'm not quite sure why you'd want to shake a stick at a bald eagle. Apparently, there's more eagles than you can shake a stick at, but I'm getting sidetracked. In any event, what Buddy did here is he used the curving shape of the shoreline and how that curving shoreline interacted with the distant shore in the background. And it creates this nice C shape that helps guide the eye through the composition. But I think this photo would have been stronger if, Buddy, you had a higher perspective. So if you'd been able to get up a few feet higher, maybe step back a little bit. I understand that you were in the water, so maybe you could have piled up some rocks or something like that to stand up to get a higher perspective. I think that would have helped out a lot, because the problem is that C shape that started in the foreground rocks merges with the shape in the background. So it's not very distinct. So you're kind of losing the shape a little bit. The two are merging together. So instead of a nice C curve, you're getting more of this sort of clumpy mass of all of this stuff together. And if you had gotten higher up, that would have opened the space up, and that C curve shape would have been better revealed. So you have to make sure when you're working with shapes that you're not squishing the shapes or flattening them so that they're not recognizable anymore. You want to choose a position where that shape is going to be revealed and optimized for your composition. This second photo is by Christina, and she said that she took this outside of a hospital that she was visiting. And I love this. I think it's really well seen. These appear to be sculpted stone balls that have been placed outside the building. This is a very common architectural accent for a lot of buildings. And I think the fact that she created a composition that was based on the repetition of that shape is really nice. You got the one stone ball in the foreground, and that shape is repeated in the middle ground and the background, and so on. And I think that was a very effective use. Once again, I think a little bit of a higher perspective, moving around a little bit so that there was more visual separation of the stone balls in the background. So that foreground stone ball is really nicely separated from anything else, but that middle ball is merging with the ball that comes right behind it. So if you had been able to choose a position, Christina, where that middle ball and that background ball were both clearly defined, I think then the repetition of the shape would have been more interesting and this would have been a more effective composition. So sometimes you got to play around with your positioning to get that right position to separate the critical visual objects within your composition and to make sure that you're creating that visual progression for the viewer that leads them deeper into the scene. Another thing that I really like about this photo is the shadowing. So you've got very strong light on one side of these stone sculptures and the other side is in shadow. And you can see how the shading, how the shadows can change the shape of an object or alter the way we perceive it. So here, having each of these stone balls divided in half by the shadow line actually turns each circle shape into two half circle shapes. So this makes the shape composition a bit more complex. So when you're working with shapes, when you're working with objects, you want to do two things. You want to walk around the object to see how the shape might change as you move around it, but you also want to see how the shape might change as the lighting changes. So sometimes the lighting will allow you to reveal an interesting shape that might not be apparent if you shot that same object in different light or in flat light. So the shadows can have a big impact on how the viewer perceives the final image. This next photo is by Francis and it was taken in a swamp in Florida. And this is a really beautiful subject. You've got all the Spanish moss hanging from the cypress tree. And I like the way that Francis framed this. There's some really nice light on it. It looks like some late evening or early morning light. So it's got some good light and it's a really great subject. And I think it's a pretty simple yet effective image. But I really think that this image could have been a lot better if you had pulled back a little bit, maybe zoomed out or gone vertical so that you included more of the shape created by the reflection in the water. That reflection is really nice and it leads the eye to the main subject. So it actually acts like a foreground. So because of the fact that that reflection is vertical in the water, I think going vertical and going a little bit wider to give it more breathing room, a little bit more runway would have really helped make this composition look a lot better. And that extra runway would have really helped at propelling the viewer deeper into the scene. It would have started them off in the foreground and given them a lot of a push, bringing them to the background. I think that would have been a lot more dynamic. So when you are working with a subject that's reflected in water and you've got a reflection, make sure to include the entire reflection. Really give that reflection some prominence in the composition. So think critically about how you can use the reflection and the object in the background, how you can get those two shapes to relate to one another. This next photo is by Hart, and these are some really intricate patterns in ice on a small stream. And the shapes in this ice, they're amazing. I've been photographing ice for, I don't know, maybe 20, 25 years, and I have never seen something so intricate. These shapes are so geometric. They're really fantastic. This was a great find, Hart, and I think it's a nice photo. I think you did a good job with this. But if it were me, I would have probably spent hours working on those shapes. There are so many shapes. There's so many intricate shapes. I would have experimented with going in closer and just focusing on some of the more interesting patterns that were created. I'm sure you probably did that. I think there was another version of this that you posted. And I think when you've got something this good, you have to learn to recognize that you've got something special and magical happening. And you just got to keep on working it and working it and working it until you're ready to just collapse out of exhaustion or until those great conditions go away. So this was a real special find. And I think you made a nice photo here. But I think there was definitely some opportunity to do a lot more, to go in tighter, to focus more on those shapes, to exclude a lot of the surrounding scenery, which wasn't nearly as interesting. So the next time that you find something that is this good, this unique, this amazing, don't stop. Keep working it as long as you can. Try different things. Push the envelope. Keep working one shot after the next, trying to do something better each time until you make the most amazing shots that you possibly can. This next shot is by Henri-Pierre from Tasmania, and it's a really lovely waterfall. It looks like you did everything right here. This is a good composition. You use the rapids in the foreground and you had the waterfall in the background, so that creates some of that near-far visual tension, something I discuss a lot in my Ultimate Photography Composition course and also in my Ultimate Landscape Photography course. That near-far composition is one of the most important styles of composition for landscape photography. So learning how to find a really effective foreground to juxtapose against that background scenery is really key to making successful landscape photos. So check out either course if you want to learn more. And it looks like you used a polarizer filter, which is a real critical accessory for doing waterfall and stream photography. The polarizer will remove glare and hot spots from wet rocks and from the water and even from the foliage, and that's going to help enhance contrast and optimize color. The one thing that I think you could have done differently that would have made this shot better was to back up a little bit or go a little bit wider, or maybe aim the camera down a little bit and include more of that shape created by the flowing water below the rapids in the foreground. So that flowing water creates this really nice diagonal line shape. And once again, I think you want to give that shape a bit more runway so it is more effective at leading the viewer's eye deeper into the composition. So in essence, that streaking water would have become the foreground, that rapid would have become your middle ground, and then the waterfall would have been the background. That would create this path for the viewer, these three distinct stepping stones, if you will: foreground, middle ground, background, boom, 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 creating a rhythm and a beat in this composition, getting the viewer's eye moving and getting the viewer engaged more deeply with the scene. And that is ultimately your goal. And the best way to do that, once again, is to make sure you're not cutting off any important shape. So if you've got an important shape, give it some breathing room. Make sure that you're using that shape as effectively as you can. This next photo is by HP, and it shows a kayaker on a river, and I think this is a really good use of shape. So the shape that's being used here is the shape created by the wake of the kayak. So the wake is creating a diagonal line, one that's going into the upper left and the other that is going into the upper right of the photo. And so these two diagonal lines working together creates this triangle shape that points the viewer from the top of the photo to the kayak at the bottom of the photo. And I think this is a really effective use of shape. And I think you can guess what I'm going to say. What would make this photo better is if you had given that shape a bit more breathing room, more runway. So I think that going vertical and maybe zooming out a little bit would have taken that V shape, that triangle shape, and stretched it out. It would have had more room. So it would have had this extra space to move the eye from the top down to the bottom of the photograph. And that extra space, that extra runway would give that shape more visual power in this composition. It would accelerate the propulsion of the viewer's eye from the top to the bottom. So I'm going to keep saying this until I am blue in the face, but make sure when you're working with shapes to include the entire shape and to give that shape extra space, especially if it's a visually powerful shape. That way, if you give it more room, you will optimize the dynamic effect that the shape creates. This photo by Jordan appears to be a photograph of railroad tracks taken through some sort of chain link fencing. And I think this is really cool. What I really like about it is how the fencing isn't all in the same plane of focus. So some of it is out of focus and other parts of it are completely in focus. That really helps give this photograph this really nice three-dimensional feel. And I love the use of the repetition of that same circular shape over and over again, but I really like the fact that that shape isn't repeated exactly the same way each time. So there's a lot of variation in the shape. You see a lot of these shapes looking differently because they're angled in a different way, or they're out of focus, or they're in focus. So breaking up the pattern, introducing those anomalies is really effective. So even though I think this is a really cool use of shape, and I think it's a neat shot, one thing that I think that would have really elevated the shot, made it much better, is if you had waited for a train to go by. So having a train zooming by in the background would have been a really nice touch. It would have been the icing on this cake. Next is a shot by Thomas, and it's beautiful. It's a wonderful shot. This is a pattern-based image created by this succulent plant. So all the leaves that are sticking out, they all repeat that same triangle shape over and over again, and those triangles are arrayed in this really stunning radial pattern. And so this is just pulling the viewer's eye from the edges and the corners of the image into the center of the composition and holding it there. So this is a really dynamic composition. I love this black and white treatment. It almost looks like it's been converted to infrared, and I think it's really effective. So Thomas, this is a great shot. Well done. I wouldn't change a thing about this. This next photo is by Lily, and this is a sand dune in Namibia, and this dune has a really nice shape. So these sand dunes in Namibia have really great shapes, and they become a very popular photographic subject. As a matter of fact, I have photographed maybe not this exact dune, but some other dunes like it. And here's an example of one of the photographs I took in Namibia where I was working with the shapes. The difference between my photo and Lily's photo, actually there's two key differences. One is the light. So Lily, it looks like you took your photo when the sun was a little bit higher in the sky. And so you've got one side of the dune that's illuminated, but there is still some light hitting that shadow side of the dune. And that's causing that curving shape of the crest of the dune to be not as strong as it otherwise would have been. So if you'd waited when the sun was a bit lower and taken that shot, so you only had light on one side of the dune and the other side was completely in shadow, that would have revealed that S curve much stronger, and you would have had a much more dynamic effect, very similar to what I had in my photo. The second key difference is that in my shot, that curving shape leads down to the dead tree in the foreground. So that curving shape interacts with the shape of the tree. And in your shot, Lily, that curve doesn't actually lead anywhere. There are some trees at the bottom of this dune, but it would have been nice if there was a single object or a single shape that beautiful S curve led to that would have helped take this composition to the next level. So that might have been a dead tree at the bottom of the dune. So if you had moved around, you might have been able to find a position that would allow that shape to come down onto one prominent dead tree. Or maybe it could have been a small cloud in the sky that drifted in perfectly at the top of that dune. So it's a really lovely photo that you put together here, but if you had better light, the shape would have been better revealed. And when you have a really great shape like a C curve or an S curve, it is sometimes a good idea to make sure that that shape leads to some other prominent, important object in the scene. So you want that shape to hand the viewer off to another important part of the composition. This final photo is by Jeremey, and this was taken in Shenandoah National Park. Once again, my old stomping grounds from back in the day when I was living in the Washington, D.C. area. I've been up to this spot many times, and it's a really beautiful place to make photographs at sunset, especially during the summer when you've got stormy weather. And that's what Jeremey did here. He's got these beautiful stormy clouds in the background. And I love the fact that he included the sun star just peeking over the edge of the rock. And so to get that really nice sun star effect, you want to use a wide angle lens, and you want to stop down to a relatively small aperture like f11 or f16. And that's when you're going to get that really nice starburst effect. And the best way to avoid getting lens flare is to partially block the sun by something else in your scene. So the rocks here were perfect. You wait for the moment when the sun is just peeking out from the edge of the rocks. And that way you're going to get a really nice sun star, but you're not going to get a lot of lens flare that's going to ruin the rest of the photo. And the shapes here, the rock has some really interesting shapes, all these boulders at the top of the mountain. But what I like about this is because they're backlit, because Jeremey was shooting into the light, so the shapes are mostly in silhouette, and that helps simplify the shapes. So you've got a few prominent triangles that are created by these dark boulders that are in shadow. And those triangles are creating these diagonal lines that are all leaning in from the edges and the corners of the image. And they're bringing the viewer from the edges and the corner into that central part of the composition where the sun and the stormy sky in the background are located. So I think this shot is very effective. I love the stormy feel. It's a very moody piece. So Jeremey, congratulations. This is the winner of this episode of the Photo Critique. And Jeremey, you are the winner of the Hunt's Photo $50 gift card. Great job. Well, that's it for today. And thank you guys so much for submitting all of these amazing photos to the Photo Critique. So summer's on its way and things are beginning to reopen and there's a lot of pent-up demand. I know that people want to do travel and get out and take pictures again. So I know that you're all going to be very busy over the next few months. Personally, I'm swamped. I've got photo workshops. I've got travel coming up. I just don't have that much free time, and I'm working on a bunch of other videos. So let's hit the pause button and take a little break from the Photo Critique. We'll get back up and running later on this year when everyone has more time. So the best way to know when that's going to happen is to make sure that you are on the Shuttermonkeys mailing list. And the easiest way to do that is to follow the link in the description below this video. That will take you to a page where you can sign up to get my free ebook. It's a free download, and that will help you be a better photographer. And that'll put you on the mailing list, which will give you regular updates whenever we drop our next helpful video. So you'll get plenty of free photo tips delivered directly to your inbox without being spammed. And that's the best way to know when we get the photo critique started up again. And it's also the best way to know whenever we drop our next helpful video. I'm Ian Plant, and I'll see you next time. Hey guys, thanks for watching. Here are a few more great videos that I think you'll enjoy and learn a lot from. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and get notified by ringing that bell so that you always know when we drop our next helpful video.